A frozen horizon stretches endlessly beneath a white sky. Wind howls across the Antarctic plateau, erasing footprints almost as soon as they are made. In this lifeless expanse, two expeditions raced not just against each other, but against time, cold, and human limits. One would achieve victory, the other would become one of the most haunting tragedies in exploration history. Welcome to Mysterio Archives, unlocking the secrets of time. Today, we're uncovering Captain Scott and the race to the South Pole. At the dawn of the 20th century, Antarctica remained the last great unknown on Earth. By 1909, British naval officer Robert Falcon Scott had already tasted polar ambition. During his first expedition, the Discovery Expedition of 1901-1904, Scott reached further south than any human before him, stopping at latitude 82 degrees 17 is. Though he failed to reach the pole, he returned to Britain as a national hero, determined to finish what he had started. By 1910, a new expedition was formed, the British Antarctic Expedition, later known as the Terra Nova Expedition. Scott's goal was clear. He would reach the geographic South Pole and secure Britain's place in history. What Scott did not initially know was that he would not be alone in this ambition. Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had secretly changed his plans. Originally aiming for the North Pole, Amundsen redirected his expedition south after learning that the North Pole had likely already been claimed. The race began quietly, without formal declaration. Scott's ship, Terra Nova, departed Cardiff in June 1910 and reached Antarctica via New Zealand. Amundsen's ship, Fram, sailed south around the same time, establishing a base at the Bay of Whales on the Ross Ice Shelf. From the very start, their approaches could not have been more different. Amundsen relied heavily on skis, dogs, and techniques learned from Inuit Arctic cultures. His team wore animal skin clothing designed for extreme cold and planned carefully measured supply depots. Scott, by contrast, favored a mixed transport strategy. His expedition relied on ponies, experimental motor sledges, dogs, and ultimately, human hauling. British expedition culture emphasized endurance and discipline, often at the expense of efficiency. In November 1911, both expeditions began their final push toward the pole. Amundsen departed first on October 19, 1911. Scott followed on November 1st. Almost immediately, Scott's plans began to unravel. The motor sledges failed early. The ponies, unsuited for Antarctic conditions, struggled in deep snow and extreme cold and were eventually euthanized. Supplies had to be redistributed, placing increasing strain on the men. Amundsen's journey unfolded very differently. His dogs thrived in the cold. His team moved swiftly across the ice, covering greater distances each day. On December 14, 1911, Roald Amundsen and 4 companions reached the South Pole at 90 degrees S. They planted the Norwegian flag, left a tent with supplies and a letter for Scott, and began their return journey. Every member of Amundsen's polar party survived. Scott's polar party consisted of 5 men: Robert Falcon Scott, Edward Wilson, Henry Birdie Bowers, Lawrence Oates, and Edgar Evans. On January 17, 1912, they reached the South Pole, only to find Amundsen's flag already flying. Scott recorded the moment in his diary with quiet devastation. The goal that had driven them across a frozen continent was gone. The return journey became a slow descent into disaster. Edgar Evans suffered a serious head injury and frostbite and died on February 17, 1912, near the base of the Beardmore Glacier. Lawrence Oates, weakened by frostbite and gangrene, famously walked out into a blizzard on March 16th, saying, "I'm just going outside and maybe some time." His sacrifice was meant to give the others a chance to survive. Scott, Wilson, and Bowers continued on, battling starvation, exhaustion, and relentless storms. In late March 1912, they were trapped in their tent by a prolonged blizzard just 11 miles from One Ton Depot, a supply cache that could have saved their lives. With no strength left and no break in the weather, the men died in their tent. Scott's final diary entries, written in fading pencil, appealed to the British public to care for the families of his companions. Their bodies were discovered in November 1912 by a search party. Scott's journals, letters, and photographs were recovered, preserved by the cold. News of the tragedy reached Britain in February 1913 and shocked the world. Scott and his companions were hailed as heroes, symbols of courage, sacrifice, and endurance in the face of impossible odds. For decades, Scott's expedition was framed as a noble failure, contrasting sharply with Amundsen's efficient success. However, modern historians have revisited the race with a more critical lens. Scott's leadership decisions, reliance on unsuitable transport, and rigid adherence to tradition have been questioned. Amundsen's victory is now recognized as the result of careful planning, cultural adaptation, and pragmatic leadership rather than mere luck. Yet reducing Scott's story to mistakes alone misses its deeper meaning. The Terra Nova expedition was also a scientific mission. Scott's team conducted extensive geological, meteorological, and biological research. Even as they faced death, Wilson, Bowers, and Scott carried 35 pounds of fossilized plant specimens, evidence that Antarctica was once warm and forested. These discoveries later helped support theories of continental drift. The race to the South Pole was more than a contest between two men. It marked the end of the so-called Heroic Age of Antarctic exploration. After Scott and Amundsen, exploration would become increasingly mechanized, driven by technology rather than human endurance alone. Captain Scott's legacy remains complex. He was not the first to the pole, nor the most efficient explorer. But his story endures because it captures something deeply human: ambition, perseverance, and the fragile line between triumph and tragedy. In the frozen silence of Antarctica, Scott's final journey became a lesson written in ice. This is the Mysterio Archives, unlocking the secrets of time. The past shapes the world we live in today. If this story made you see history differently, like the video, share it with a fellow explorer of time and join the conversation below. Subscribe to Mysterio Archives and help preserve the stories that built our world.